Welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury. Welcome to the Pompey Politics Podcast.
I'm Ian Tiny Morris.
And I'm Simon Sansbury.
Marvellous. Well, welcome back after 101 days without the Pompey Politics Podcast. Here we are with new technology, new things for Simon to break and new things to go, what's that doing? That shouldn't do that. But we're back.
We're back, yes. We're back.
Yeah, we slightly extended our summer break. It all went slightly chaotic at the end of the summer. I ended up playing more cricket than I expected, and then you managed to do something unspeakable to your arm. So we took probably a most indulgent 101-day break. But here we are back firing all cylinders for the autumn series, and we don't want to jinx anything, but it looks like we've got some pretty cracking episodes lined up before Christmas.
It does, yeah. It looks like we've actually organised ourselves, which is a miracle in itself. So we'll kind of take that as a win. But yes, we've got this, which is our roundup of what's happened while we've been away, and then we've also next week we're going to be covering the full council meeting, the Portsmouth City Full Council meeting, and the week after we'll be hearing from the Women's Group of Councillors and Portsmouth City Council. That's something that we've been trying for quite a while to kind of get organised. There have been a couple of elections in the way, so we thank them for their continued patience and perseverance in trying to get something to work with that. And then we'll be talking about an American election. There's something going on over the pond, apparently. And yeah, there's loads of stuff. It's almost like we've got a plan. What's wrong with you?
Well, indeed. Yeah, no, it's you know what they say about the best laid plans. Mike Tyson said everybody has a plan till they get punched in the face. But hopefully that won't happen to us. So you have got the extensive list of stuff that has happened since we last broadcast, and we'll let some of them slip by, and then for a few others we'll probably have a bit of a kickabout and see where that takes us.
Yeah, so I've got a bit of a list. There's several things in it. I'm going to try to go through quickly. So shout the things that we want to kind of cover in more details. But I'm going to skip all the stuff that's in America, because we're going to be covering America in a couple of weeks. So, July the 5th, general election results. Spoiler alert, Labour won.
Yeah, didn't they just?
More than just, but they did indeed win quite convincingly. July 16th, full council motions about the shortage of ADHD medication and SEND provision. July 21st, so I'm going to skip that one because it's an American one. 23rd, Starmer withdraws the whip for 7 Labour MPs who voted to support the SNP amendment to the King's speech that would have removed the 2-child benefit cap.
Just pausing on that one very quickly, because that was
Sure.
one of those ones which I think it was an interesting one in terms of I think it got misrepresented, because the child benefit in itself does get paid for more than 2 children. I think it's tax credits and some other benefits that are capped at 2 children. But I guess the interesting thing there is Kay's response to the first bit of open rebellion. Kind of laid down a marker pretty early, perhaps, that
Up with this we shall not put.
Yeah, exactly that. So we'll carry on down the list and see whether there's other flashes of Sir Kay doing a bit of muscle flexing, but perhaps an early indication.
Yeah. 29th, Rachel Reeves announces the discovery of the £22 billion black hole, and limiting winter fuel allowance to pensioners on pension credit.
Should we cover that one now?
Go on,
that's
then.
Probably
Go on.
Well, it's quite a big story, isn't it? If we use our kind of lightning rod of the Portsmouth politics pages, there have been many threads of varying degrees of emotion about the withdrawal of the winter fuel allowance for those who are not on pension credit. And I think, when we've touched on it, it's left us all slightly befuddled, hasn't it, Simon?
Um, it's a bit of a weird one. It kind of feels like an unforced error, if I'm honest, in the sense that,
Mm,
in the grand scheme of things, it's not going to save a massive amount of money. And I don't think anybody in their right mind thinks that the likes of Alan Sugar should be still getting winter fuel allowance. But to have the cut off at the point that it is, I guess that enters into the how expensive is it to have some sort of scheme that sets the cut off line somewhere else. But it does seem quite an arbitrary low place to kind of have that cut off.
yeah, I mean, the cut-off, as I understand it, is but I think it's just under 12K.
Mm.
And if you get the sort of full state pension, I think I saw somewhere that it's basically that's £2 more than the cut-off point. So it just seems a little bit it just seems a little bit kind of arbitrary in terms of, you know, less than 12K is a pretty low kind of, is a pretty low amount to live on. Um, and I think there is always this thing with any universal benefit. It's very easy to administer because it's how old are you, right? Then you get it, smiley face. But as you say, the very rich, £200 is not going to make a difference. Um, and I guess what it has done is opened up a whole discussion around sort of pensions. And from a political perspective, as you say, there is now a very strong drive, as there should have been, to encourage people to apply for pension credit if they're entitled. And that of that generation, and I see this in my work life, there are still lots of people who kind of my organisation works with some older people with vision impairment who are still very reticent to claim the benefits that they're entitled to because there's just a kind of a stoic kind of, well, I've never asked for anything all my life. I'm not asking for anything now. Um, but it almost feels like this has been very damaging. And even if we look at it through the cold, hard lens of politics, it does feel like a horrible own goal, doesn't it?
I just feel like it is. As I say, I think it's that it's got the feeling of an unforced error on it, and it kind of feels like of all the places you could try to find 1.7 billion, that that doesn't kind of seem like the like. To be honest, it doesn't seem like a Labour thing to do. Um, if anything, and I think that it kind of seems like they were in a rush to show that they were doing something immediately. But I don't know that it needed that rapid attention. But I guess the kind of follow up story is what we'll see in the budget on the 30th of October is this kind of like a preamble of this is an awful thing that we've done, but this is what we've been able to figure out since, and therefore they're either kind of foretelling of just how bloody awful the budget's going to be, or the foretelling of, oh, we did that thing because we didn't want to leave it in a state in July, but now actually in October in the budget perhaps there'll be some ways to row back on that, or to kind of deal with and mitigate those that are going to be affected that just miss out on pension credits and that are really going to miss out on that £300 toward their heating bills at a time when the price cap on energy fuels has gone up by 10%.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think we're all eyes are casting towards the budget, but I think we can agree that whilst it wasn't perfect in its previous guise, it doesn't look like they've made it better. And as we say, politically own goal. Let's crack on with the list.
Okay, so where did we get to? So let's have a look. So so the riots between the 30th of July and the 5th of August.
Mm,
The riots that are up and down in several places of the country that seem to be on the back of on the back of a terrible incident. But
yes.
no one, well, certain parts of should we say, certain parts of the political spectrum seem to waste no time in trying to use that as an excuse to go and commit loads of violent damage, and threaten to set fire to places like immigration hotels and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very ugly episode and
Mm.
a little bit of authoritarian style, which I kind of didn't mind. The fact was that there was a very rapid response. People were getting fast tracked into courts and handed some pretty heavy sentences, and that seemed to quell everything pretty quickly. I mean, obviously, from a political standpoint, that opened up these sort of allegations of two-tier Kia. There had been some marches in London which had which had seen some criminal damage and threats of violence, and that kind of hadn't perhaps been as policed as hard. But I think from a competency and from the position of this has to stop. Perhaps I'm a more authoritarian than libertarian figure. I think he handled that pretty well, and quelled the flames pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean, for a while there, it looked scary and worrying. Like you say, there was abhorrent actions on the streets, and well, head scratching as to why sensible people would think that it's a great idea to get involved in that sort of violence. Obviously, it's not, and it was disgraceful. There are other ways to protest if you've got a concern, but I don't think he could have done anything else, to be really honest with you. And even given the situation with the prisons, even though they'd already mentioned about having to release some people early because basically they were running out of prison spaces quicker than anything, I don't think they could have left the people that were being arrested from basically the thugs that were being arrested from the actions that they took, being left at the back of the queue. They needed to be able to show that there was swift and reasonable justice, in order to be able to stop everyone else basically jumping onto the bandwagon. So I don't think he could have done anything else, and I think it dealt with well. But it feels a long time ago now. But I'm sure those communities feel the scars of understanding that some of their neighbours are actually quite prepared to take violence into their hands to deal with poorly understood and poorly communicated policies or impacts to their communities.
Yeah, not one for us to unpick now, but it's
No.
very interesting, isn't it? Because I know that I tried to follow. I saw a couple of people in the mainstream media who tried to follow the thread back to where did the misinformation come from, and
It was the
you know,
patient zero kind of thing.
yeah, and I don't think even the mainstream media could agree where it started. It looked malicious. It looks like speculation, but yeah, I worry that something can catch from such a spark. But let's move through the calendar some more.
Okay, so August the 16th, another full council. Grand part of the conversation that took place there was a bit of a bit of a debate, although it wasn't actually a motion to be discussed, was about the pros and cons of electing in thirds or in all-ups in Portsmouth. So Portsmouth being one of the unitary authorities that has, so in every ward there's three councillors, and so for 3 out of the 4 years, one of those councillors is up for re-election. The 4th year is so-called the fallow year, which, if we weren't a unitary authority, would be voting for Hampshire County Council. Yeah, differing parties have different views about the pros and cons as to whether it's a good idea to keep going to the electorate every year to re-energise that mandate. And others making the point that essentially the administration actually misses out on time of administering because it's spending so much of its governing time actually in election mode. And political parties are pretty much just leafleting the city into oblivion to achieve that, and there's no time to actually do some of the things that need to be done to change it. So a big kind of question, and I think there's pros and cons on both sides. Weirdly enough, the administration aren't in favour of moving to all-up elections, but the parties that are in opposition are all in favour of moving to all-up elections, much in the same way that existing governments have been in favour of maintaining first past the post, but the most opposition parties, or the smaller ones, are in favour of proportional representation.
Well, and I guess the Lib Dems are a minority administration, aren't they? So,
Yeah.
if all of the other parties, I guess, could coordinate, then I don't know what the mechanism is for changing it. We don't have any elections next year. We do have all outs
Yes.
in 26, but
Hmm.
that will be three councillors elected for each ward, one on a 1 year term, one on a 2 year
Hmm.
term, and one on a 3 year term. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it all
It,
seems a little bit.
it'll be an interesting
Um,
one. The mechanism, by the way, would be, as I understand it, passing a motion at full council in order to. Well, I don't know because the administration doesn't have to necessarily enact stuff that's passed at motion. I'm
yeah,
not sure as to kind of, but essentially you'd only be able to do that by having a referendum of the city to ask whether, because the current electoral mechanism was agreed with the city in a referendum in the 90s, I think. A citywide referendum would also have to be the mechanism by which that was undone. And we, of course, we in the UK we love referendums; they go so well.
it'll only be advisory unless we win. Right, let's gloss over that and move forward.
Steady on, steady on. August 22nd, Summers Orchard replacing the Horatio and Lymington House buildings that had been demolished basically because they were unsafe. So the replacement development, replacing the same number of homes, receives planning consent. August 28th, the MOD restates its security concerns about the Aquin interconnector, but there's been silence pretty much from the government since as to when
Mm.
there will be a decision about what's actually happening about that bloody cable. um, so,
Well, it's got. I mean, it's one of those, and I know with all these things gets bogged down in legal mire and everything else, but yeah, it's one that we've covered on the podcast many times with the expectation of, and the answer is, and the answer's still not out there. So we'll keep watching this space.
we will indeed. Sorry, just keeping up with the comments a little bit as we go. We've got a bit of a technical snafu with the comments not coming through properly my end, so my apologies if I'm missing any. It looks like the stream hasn't made its way to YouTube, but it is still actually going out on Facebook and on Twitter Space or X Spaces. Sorry. Tim Owens mentioned something about will there be background soundtrack of flushing toilets and gurgling sinks to mark Labour's first 100 days as it disappears down the plug hole. Well,
Oh, Tim, God bless him,
there
has
won't be a
been
soundtrack.
no,
A sound effect. I'm afraid
and
I've missed the mark on that one.
well, and to be fair, I think this refers to the fact that I accused Tim of jumping up about every 30 seconds, shouting that Keir Starmer smells of wee, and I don't mean the French perfume. So I think that's where that reference is headed. So yes, yeah, we'll keep it clean, Tim.
We'll keep it clean. Anyway, so September the 4th, Amanda Martin, the newly minted MP for Portsmouth North, makes her maiden speech in Parliament. Also on the same day, Tories Got Talent 2024, Priti Patel is knocked out of the race with only 14 votes, Jenrick on 28, Badenoch on 22, Cleverly on 21, Tugendhat on 17, Stride on 16.
Should we leave it till we get down to the final two to kick about
Yeah,
two
I'm
GT?
not gonna do the
Yeah.
I'll mark the who's doing what, but I won't keep doing the numbers. HMOs, Portsmouth Independence Party promotes a survey for residents, basically seeking that they're trying to push the council to seek that HMO rules are changed to reduce the limit from 10% to 5%. There's a rule that we'd covered in a previous episode about the percentage of dwellings that are HMOs within is it 50-meter radius? I forget. We did a whole kind of thing about whether that could be made a thing in force. First PMQ since the summer recess, outgoing Conservative leader Rishi Sunak challenged the PM about government decision on winter fuel allowance. Starmer, quite predictably, stating that his party were elected to clear up the mess left by the Conservatives. Starmer also apologises in Parliament to the victims of the Grenfell disaster and at the publication of the report. Prosecutors will decide on possible charges by the end of next year. which
Mm.
kind of seems a while to wait. September the 5th, Barnier becomes the French PM. 6th to 8th, Green Party conference in Manchester. 9th, public hearings of the UK COVID inquiry begin. September 10th.
Yeah,
Oh,
and I think we just touch on public inquiries
mm,
for a minute there because it's that, you know, how many thousands or tens of thousands of documents are going to be. Yeah, if you look at Grenfell, it's that element of, I can't remember how many years. I did see it when it was, and it was just that. How can you not have done all the inquiring that you ever need to do? And like when you say that we'll decide if there's criminal charges by the end of next year. I guess I just don't understand how anything can move that slowly. Um, which, and again, it's like with the COVID inquiry. I get it. I get it. It's complex. And one of the things that in the heat of it, I was always saying to people, well, you won't know anything until probably 3 or 4 years after the pandemic has ended to look back retrospectively to see what was done well and what could have been done better. But these things do seem to take forever, don't they?
they do. There is an interesting point about inquiring about inquiries. That's actually an issue kind of made later on. So that's probably worth actually covering at that point. But it's there just seem to be too many inquiries that don't seem to actually deliver anything, or what is actually in them isn't actually enacted or dealt with, and it just seems to be taking such a painful amount of time. But again, that there's a kind of another thing to kind of speak to that later on. September 10th, winter fuel allowance changes voted through 348 to 228, with 52 Labour MPs not taking part, including 7 ministers. It's unclear whether they were otherwise busy or they just actually abstained. Mel Stride is eliminated from round 2 of the Tory leadership contest. Nurses and teachers get inflation-busting pay rise. Doctors and dentists get 6%. Nurses and other NHS staff and teachers get 5.5%.
Just a quick pause there,
okay.
because obviously it's a 22 billion black hole. 11 billion of that is the pay rises that Labour awarded. So, and again, it was interesting this morning. There was one of their folk on the politics show saying, "And we've ended the strikes, we've ended the industrial tension." Well, if you roll over and give the unions exactly what they want, then that does tend to end the industrial action. It does somewhat burden the treasury going forward. So I do find it a little bit disingenuous that the 22 billion is a bit half and half in terms of the amount of money that is in it. But
but weren't those the amounts that the recommendations from the pay review bodies actually suggested that they actually go ahead with?
Definitely, definitely. In the same way that there were similar recommendations before when that lark that was the austerity years were in play, and the government had to say, "I'm sorry, we haven't got the money to pay for that." But
no, but I guess that's certainly an argument you can continue to do for so long if it's been going on 10 years, and it gets to, and then wonder why you're struggling to retain or recruit nurses, doctors, and teachers. Then kind of seems like they're linked in some way. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's just and again, look, as we've discussed on the podcast many times, being in government is about making choices, isn't it? And you actually, when you're in government, you have to stand in front of your choices and say, well, we chose to spend money here. We didn't choose to spend money over there. And I think the bit I struggle with, if I'm honest with you, Simon, is not necessarily the awarding of them, but the effectively putting those awards on the bar tab of the previous administration. But I guess that's politics.
Yeah, I think there's something about those recommendations were sat and ignored on the desk and basically just left depending on who you speak to about whether basically that was just I'm going to give you this hot potato and I'm just going to walk out the door and leave you to it because we're just not going to make a decision that's the right one. But as you say, that's a different kettle of onions that we could open on another day. September 11th, government confirms £500 million subsidy for Tata Steel, claiming it has now reached a new and improved deal. Sounds like a washing commercial, despite 2,500 jobs still set to go. September 12th, BBC reports Conservatives took a further £5 million donation from controversial businessman Frank Hester days before the GE in July. He's the one who said awful things about Diane Abbott.
Yes, and then subsequently apologised, and apologised obviously enough for the Tory party to take another £5 million of his money.
So September 14th, no new pledge on missiles for Ukraine. Oh, sorry, that was a US thing. September 15th, reports in press after declaration of gifts from Keir Starmer show he and his wife Victoria accepted donations of clothing to, quote, look their best.
This is one we've got to have a bit of a dig at, haven't we?
There's further ones on it, so do you want to pick it up then?
Oh, is there? There's more to come.
Yeah.
Keep going.
Ryan Wesley Ruth cited, I think I've spelled cited wrong there, bearing a rifle in the shrubs at Trump International Golf Club, West Palm Beach, Florida. Secret Service agents shot at him and he fled. Ruth was later charged with attempted assassination of Donald Trump. September 16th, House of Lords report. I've done an American thing again, haven't I? Sorry. I've done a House of Lords report from Lord Norton concludes that public inquiries, i.e. Grenfell, etc., take too long and lessons are not being learned. Government said it would study the recommendations. So we've got a recommendation that recommendations aren't being studied and aren't being implemented, but we're going to study the study of the recommendations that says that recommendations aren't being implemented. It feels... If it wasn't so serious
there's a
and
two Ronnie
miserable,
sketch in
yes,
there. I think
it
is in the Four Candles, isn't
yes,
it?
there's enough.
Yes.
That's enough from him. And
yep.
September 17th, government extends the post-Brexit trader support scheme to help businesses deal with new customs processes, extending it by another year. The contract is for Fujitsu, a led consortium, to provide support acting as a government-backed customs agents. Hopefully, the software is better than the post office one.
Yeah, let's hope they fix that in post.
Was that a pun?
A little bit.
It's all about delivery, isn't it? September 18th, after securing 14% of the vote at the GE, Nigel Farage says he's giving up ownership of Reform and surrendering all of his shares as the party begins a democratisation process. September 14th to the 17th, the Lib Dem conference is held in Brighton. Lots of pictures of Ed Davey arriving on a jet ski.
Yes. God bless Ed Davey.
September. He knew.
I like the cut of his jib. I think at the end of the day, let's be honest, the Lib Dems don't get as much airtime, perhaps, as they could or should. So I think that
they get more now that they've got 72 MPs.
Yeah. But I think the fact that Ed Davey is prepared to do the odd stunt here and there.
Prepared to take a dunk in sewage-infested water a couple of times in order to get in the press then.
No, I like the cut of his jib.
Fair play to him. September 19th, Starmer states that power pylons and solar farms might just be the cost of lower bills and energy security. Sue Gray, the ex-civil servant that led the investigation into parties in Downing Street during COVID, who'd been employed by Starmer as chief of staff. Downing Street leaks reveal her salary is £170,000 a year, which is £3,000 greater than that of Starmer. Starmer insists he is in control.
I mean that one just very briefly. The Sue Gray's on 170k a year.
Yes.
If you're chief of staff to the Prime Minister, I'm reckoning that's probably not a rock up at 9 till 5, work flexibly from home in your gym jam sort of job. And in central London, I was surprised it was as little as 170k, if I'm honest. I know people get all very excited about six-figure salaries, but yeah. I mean, it was, but it was almost in the style of a Dominic of Christmas Past. The leaks were already starting as she took up her position. But we'll come on to that later. ...
Yeah, hold your horses. Um, Starmer defends decision to accept corporate hospitality or at Arsenal Football Club for a private box. There was something about he needed to be a private box because it was for the safety reasons because he's a PM. Something I think wasn't it Lee Anderson or Farage criticised him for saying, "Well, I go to a football match and don't need to go into a box." But yeah, so 22nd of September to the 25th. Sorry, excuse me. Labour conference in Liverpool. 23rd, Sinn Féin leader at a fringe event at the Labour conference urged the UK government to stop dodging a timeline for Irish reunification. There was some fact checks actually from the BBC published about should the £22 billion black hole have been a surprise. I think their conclusion was overall that really it probably shouldn't. The review found a delay that preventing the sending of 2,688 postal ballots in the general election in northwest Essex was an error caused by a lack of clear communication between the council and its supplier, and that it was entirely avoidable. Well, I'm sure that shocked no one.
Yeah. Well, at least we didn't have to wait 3 years for that
Yeah, but
inquiry.
the explanation was in the post, wasn't it? September
Yeah, it
24th,
was.
takeaways from Keir Starmer's 54-minute conference speech, focusing on message of national renewal, that there will be trade-offs and that there are no easy answers, talked about energy and prisons, but there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You sound
I
like you were
guess
going to
there.
interrupt me. Go on.
Yeah, no, I guess there was the interesting thing for me in that speech was that somebody had a word, didn't they? Because up until their conference, it was all 22 billion black hole, 14 years of Tory incompetence. It was all very miserable, wasn't it? And then Sir Kay got up and did the light at the end of the tunnel renewal. So it was almost like somebody had a word because I know I'd seen some figures around the time that economic confidence was not great. There what hadn't been the sort of bounce that was expected through Labour's landslide, and it was all a bit doom and gloom. So yeah, a bit of razzmatazz from Sir Kay there
Yeah, I
to
mean, there
get
was
through.
some comments elsewhere that basically, despite having won a massive landslide historic majority, the Labour conference was actually quite low key and quite and described by others as quite kind of depressing and downbeat, whereas the Conservative conference, considering the complete and utter drubbing that they received, seemed to be really, really upbeat, which kind of didn't seem to. It just kind of seemed like there was a bit of a reality check kind of missing somewhere. Of do you guys kind of have you not kind of realised
Well,
that you've just lost like 2/3 of your MPs? So it did seem kind of like a weird one. Obviously, the Lib Dem and the Green conferences were as you would expect, but it did seem an interesting. It's definitely a chalk and cheese between obviously the wave of the euphoria of positivity and hope that that Tony Blair rode into power in 1997.
hmm.
Entirely different economic situation as well, I guess. But very, 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 very interesting to kind of comment on that. It's certainly not an easy start, and that's also something
No,
that Starmer comments on himself later on, which seems like a bit of a, did you not
well,
realise
and
it was going to be this hard? But there we go.
yeah, and I guess there's a part in that, isn't there, Simon, which is that, you know, if we leave politics aside and we just focus on COVID and Ukraine, um, they're big old issues, aren't they? That you know aren't going away, and the economic impact of those has been massive and severe. And there's the Middle East is edging closer to all-out war. So I guess there an element of you've won the prize. This is now yours to sort out. Versus well, we've got absolutely battered. Um,
But at
but
least we're
it's
not
not
having to
down to
deal with
us.
it. Yeah.
It's not down to us to sort it out now. It's that.
Yeah, it
It's
almost does
this.
feel like the victors envy the the losers in that sort of sense.
Well, there's a little bit, isn't there, of there's been 14 years of well, I wouldn't do it like that. Oh, I can't believe they're doing that. Oh, how cruel, how heartless. Oh, they've made the wrong decision there. Oh, you've missed a bit. Whereas, there's a little bit of, well, over to you now. Away you go. Show us how it's done. And so I could see there was a little bit of probably a little bit of an end of term feel to the Conservative kind of conference because, well, you know, I guess it happened far enough away that the doom and gloom had its moment, and yeah, interesting times.
On the last day of conference, a vote that had been delayed, so that it didn't take place before the leaders, the PM's last speech, September the 25th, a delayed non-binding vote at Labour Party conference brought by the unions passed, and that was a vote calling for the government basically to think again about the winter fuel allowance. But again, non-binding. So that's effectively the party saying it didn't agree with the party of government's own policy on the subject. September the 26th, 8 female councillors left Dacorum Borough, and I'm sorry, that's not a joke, Dacorum Borough Council's Lib Dem group in Hertfordshire after accusing the leader of failing to deal with allegations of bullying and harassment. The Lib Dems have now lost their majority on the council. An independent report that was commissioned by the council later concluded that the former council leader was more likely than not to have sexually harassed a female councillor. However, in a closed hearing, Dacorum Borough Council Standards Committee rejected the findings into Lib Dem Ron Tyndall's alleged behaviour.
Interesting on that, isn't it? I always get very uncomfortable with phrases like more likely than not. It's
the difference between, because in employment law you don't, in a court of law you have to prove beyond reasonable doubt, don't you? In employment law you don't have to. The burden of proof isn't as high, and a council chamber isn't a place of employment, although there are standards that councillors have to follow. But I think, as we've mentioned before, the Standards Committee don't really have tremendous powers with regard to councillors. They can sanction them, but they can't, for example, unseat them because their boss is their ward electorate. So but it did seem an ugly situation. September the 29th, Kemi Badenoch, one of the Tory leadership hopefuls, on Laura Koonsberg interview in the BBC, describes some cultures as not equally valid, although kind of seemed to skirt around the issue when she was trying to ask what she meant by that and what cultures she was referring to. She did talk about respect for women and for women's rights. And she'd also earlier claimed on a Times Radio interview that maternity pay had gone too far and that the government needed to interfere less in people's lives by pointing out that people were having more babies before there was maternity pay.
Yeah, I mean, Kemi, she's down to the final two. Lively in terms of her commentary. I think there's I mean, we'll come down to the final two when we get there.
Yeah.
But, she's not been without her quote unquote boldly spoken opinions. That there are times which she's had to row back on by saying that thing that I said, I didn't mean it, even though that's exactly what I said.
And even though I said that I don't need to be careful about what I say because I know what I'm saying and what I'm saying is right, and you've misrepresented me, even though you're quoting back to me the words I said. Yeah, it's a strange situation. Interestingly, former Conservative leader, Wilderness Conservative leader William Hague said that he now felt that he was wrong to have changed the party's rules to give the vote to choose the leader to the membership, and it should be retained by the MPs.
Well, an interesting one that, because he hasn't, and we'll come on to that. Well, he has, but he hasn't. So we'll come.
Oh, okay. To that. Oh, have I misrepresented?
No. No, 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 no.
Okay.
His what he said was true, but
Okay.
yes, we'll wait till we get to the
Oh,
fight.
okay. So, Conservative Conference was in Birmingham, 29th of September to 2nd of October. September 30th, Tom Tugendhat warns Tories against becoming reform in an interview with GB News, and that they need to rebuild trust. Trust, sorry, not rebuild trust.
Trust. No, don't rebuild
Don't
trust.
rebuild trust. At a fringe event at Conservative Party conference, James cleverly claims "Stop the Boats" slogan was an error, as even one boat would have meant that it had failed. I guess that's the difference between stop and reduce, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay. October 1st, ex-Conservative MP and ex-teacher Jonathan Gullis claims he hasn't got any interviews since losing election in July, and his views as a Tory means schools won't employ him. I'm glad that he managed to do it without talking and saying anything about cancel culture. Robert Jenrick facing criticism after claiming in a leadership contest video that UK Special Forces are killing terrorists rather than holding them, because human rights laws will force them to be released at a later date. James Cleverly and Tom Tugendhat, both ex-service personnel, among those who criticised this claim. October 2nd. The Tory leadership hopefuls make their pitches to the Tory faithful at the Conservative conference with about 20-minute speeches each. EU may miss a deadline for new border security checks. The entry and exit system is essentially supposed to gain face scans, fingerprints, biometric data from those from outside the EU entering the EU. It's meant to go live on the 10th of November, but it may not be ready. The idea being that, for example, that people driving into the continent in cars will be given tablets to basically complete that information. The Port of Dover reporting that they haven't had any tablets, so they haven't been able to test it. So that might get kind of a more of a slower launch than a deadline on the day. October 3rd, Starmer repays over £6,000 in gift donations, 6 Taylor Swift tickets, 4 tickets to races, and a clothing renting agreement with a high-end designer favoured by his wife. So I think that was the last thing about the gifts.
Yeah. I guess the thing for me is that I think, you know, people in influential positions end up getting given stuff. Now, it was all declared, so the defence was, well, it's all legal, isn't it? But I guess the piece which I struggle with in all of this story, Simon, was, very strong change message, Tory sleaze, Tory corruption. We're different. We're, all of that's going to be behind us from day one. Lots of those statements made. And is there something ugly about a multi-millionaire taking £100,000 worth of freebies? Is there something hypocritical about Angela Rayner tweeting in 2021 about accepting a holiday from a donor? They're not doing that out of the goodness of their heart, are they? All in New Year in New York, don't mind if I do, I'll stay at a donor's flat. I just think the whole thing, if they hadn't been so pious about how they were going to be different, I don't think I'd care.
I think without kind of getting into the details of it and opening it up into a massive thing, I think there are some differences between what's being reported as there being adverse reactions to what have been declared donations or gifts that have been made to members of the Labour government. Actually, but most of them actually happened. I think a lot of them happened before they actually came to power.
Definitely, they did. Yeah.
So there's a difference there, and also we know about them because they were declared. I think without sounding like going into a whataboutery exercise, the previous examples from the previous administration were issues that weren't declared, and that were that were basically had to be dragged screaming and kicking into the light. But I think fundamentally, aside from that point and your point about either this is an okay thing and it's right, and the fact that it's declared means that it's out in the open, and therefore sunlight is the best disinfectant, yada yada yada, and therefore it's not an issue, or it is an issue, and in which case we need to stop it. But then we need to have a conversation about the taxpayer funding the redecoration of the Downing Street flat, and about funding the clothing for the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's spouse,
Well,
which
do
is a
do
conversation
we
perhaps
though?
worth having. But if we're expecting either of them to attend official engagements on behalf of the country, you wouldn't, in a normal in most kind of jobs, be expecting to pay for very, very expensive clothing out of your own pocket in those sorts of situations. You would be getting that on expenses.
Would you in any other job? I don't think
Of
you
jobs
would.
of those
And
sorts of caliber, yes. If you were being required, I think you would. And
I,
if you're having to buy that sort of clothing as part of your role as a representative, and let's face it, no one elected Victoria. But if she's being required to attend things and therefore dress to a certain standard because of it, I don't know whether you need to spend however many thousands it is on a particular dress, or whether you actually could quite happily get something from somewhere else or nonetheless. But a donation means that the taxpayer's not paying for it. So either you're happy with the donation, as long as the donation doesn't come with any attached conditions as to what the donor is expecting in return for that, or the taxpayer pays for it. And I don't know that the taxpayers are ready for the taxpayer to pay for it. So we either need to
well,
accept that donations will happen, or we need to shut up about it. It's got to be
well,
one or the other.
well, fa well. Fascinatingly, though,
Mm,
Simon. Just a quick aside on that.
mm,
So Theresa May, when she was minister and prime minister, was regularly given designer gear,
mm-hmm,
and she paid for that minus the £140 that she is allowed as a minister. You're allowed to accept a gift up to the value of,
mm-hmm.
and paid for it out of her own money. So there is an element of the third way is that you as part of the role that you have, you pay for your own stuff. And I think there's, again, without wishing to overplay it,
Mm.
I just think in the workplace generally, if you had accepted £100,000 worth of stuff, you would end up, and okay, it was declared, it was legal, everything else, but nowhere would allow anyone to accept freebies from potentially interested parties. So
Well, no,
we'll see how that
I'm
one
not allowed to
runs and
accept so much
runs.
as a Mars bar from someone. So I don't. Not that anyone's offered me a Mars bar, but
No, no, no.
it's Mars bar.
Yeah,
If people want to
difference
send,
in standards, isn't it?
there's a bit of a
Right,
difference, but
let's crack on because
we're very very near the end.
yep.
So October 3rd, still, government announces proposals to review assisted dying of terminally ill people in England and Wales, that they'll be brought before Parliament this month. MPs had previously rejected a bill on the subject in 2015. I think it needs a review. I'm just worried that it's not really the sort of thing you want to rush on.
Yeah, but is it one of these things where if you look at it, the you know there are countries, obviously Dignitas in Switzerland is probably the most famous, that have been doing this for a number of years. I think there are more countries in Europe that have brought forward bills. I think there is a significant, this is a subject which I'm personally conflicted on. My mum passed away with motor neuron disease, which, thanks to the works of some very high profile celebrities, I think more people know what that pathway is. So there is an element of from an elective position. There are diseases which are terminal, which take away people's quality of life, and I think it is, from a personal perspective, I find it very difficult that we say to those people, who know ultimately they're going to lose all of their bodily functions until eventually they can't breathe and they die. Um, yeah, you've got to go through that over the next however many months. Um, when they might want to opt out when they're still capable of doing so. So, yeah, it's a tough one, and it is not an easy one because all the safeguards have to be in place for the unscrupulous folk who are waiting for their inheritance. Is the ugly truth, isn't it?
Yeah, but like you say, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. Lots of other countries have schemes that work in different ways, and we don't have to kind of start from scratch.
Yeah,
I'm just concerned that something so sensitive and something so literally,
life and
with
death.
life that is literally life and death, that it isn't rushed. And I think the reason for the kind of the personal promise from the PM to oh God, I've forgotten her name. Um, BBC
Esther Ranson.
Esther Ranson. Thank you very much. Suddenly the comments are starting to work. Hi Tim, thank you very much. We got your comments about gifts. I'll have a look at that in a second. So yeah, I just think it requires. I think it requires review. I think it should be possible with lots of controls, and as long as we can make sure that people aren't being forced to make that decision, or that decision is being made for them. It feels inhuman to force people to continue to suffer when beyond a point that you would think would be humane. But that has to be a decision for them, not someone else, not a doctor, not a family member. But that's just my view. I just
Yep.
wouldn't want us to rush, and make legislation in haste, and you can regret it at your leisure. October 4th, Portsmouth City Council signs City of Sanctuary pledge. I feel
Now
this is something
we
we're going to open up at
we
some point.
should dive into this one, but this is going to have to be a future show because there are so many
Yes.
spindles and avenues and trying to find truth and fiction and lots of
Yes.
emotion out there. We will give this full
Yeah.
sucker in a future episode.
Yeah, I think the key thing is actually understanding what it actually means. October 7th, Sue Gray quits as Chief of Staff and is replaced
And who
by
is she replaced by?
Morgan McSweeney, who was one of the leading figures in securing Labour's victory in their electoral campaign, which isn't necessarily a surprise. Britain agrees to release control of the Chagos Islands. The UK forcibly removed 1,000 islanders in the 1960s, and this agreement means that while retaining a 99-year lease for the military base there, the deal gives control of them to Mauritius. The deal was welcomed mostly internationally, including from the White House, but it was condemned by Tory hopefuls, despite it being reported that the process was actually started by James Cleverly in 2022. And the deal was criticised by descendants of the displaced Chagosians, opposed to the handing of the islands to Mauritius without them being consulted, and basically being involved in deciding their future, which does seem a thing. Tory Foreign Affairs Andrew Mitchell claimed the deal gives succour to our enemies in a dangerous world and undermines the web of Britain's defensive interests. Unpredictably, the Argentine government restated its claim to the Falkland Islands in response.
Yes, and I think I think most people won't have known where the Chagos Islands were, but I think the old 99-year lease didn't work terribly well in Hong Kong. So yeah, I think this one is. I think it's the symbolism of it more than the Chagos Islands or the plight of the Chagosians, which has caused
It's almost like
the
we don't
ripples.
learn, because whenever we get involved in deciding what happens to other countries that we at some point have decided to claim for ourselves and decide what their future will be, we seem to fuck it up and not learn from actually the mess that it causes, and the fact that if it's not ours, it's not ours.
Yeah, and I guess if the ambiguity is always, isn't it, around who has first dibs on a patch of land, and if you look at the Falkland Islands, their views were very clear, and back in 1982 there was a whole war where hundreds of people lost their lives in just that way. But
Yeah,
yes,
I think
yeah,
that's. I don't compare that. I think that's an entirely different situation. I think I don't think it's entirely unpredictable that the Argentinian government were going to try to claim
Oh
there's
no,
some
no,
sort
no.
of
Oh,
comparison, but it's not. It's not the same situation.
it's not the same. No.
In an interview with Matt Chorley on BBC Radio 5 Live, Boris Johnson was accused of being a liar to do with basically the release of his book. Also, unpredictably, Johnson disagreed. Tories Got Talent down to the final three, with Tugendhat being voted off. October the 9th, PMQ's Keir Starmer defended the government's planning to raise taxes and borrow to fund investment. Sunak accusing Starmer would raise that from employers' national insurance and tax contributions. Starmer saying that he would stick to the manifesto pledge not to raise taxes on working people. So effectively kind of making Sunak's point for him. All to be revealed, I guess, in the budget on the 30th.
Yeah, interesting. It was a bit of a foretelling this morning that, and again, sometimes you don't know whether these have been leaked. That Rachel Reeves is planning to bin the fiscal responsibility rules to borrow for quote unquote infrastructure investment. So yeah,
We
we'll
should.
wait and
Well, we
see.
should. We shall see. Starmer also repeats public statements that the Falkland Islands and Gibraltar will stay British. Tories Got Talent final round cleverly excluded, leaving Badenoch and Jenrick to face the full ballot of the party members, with the result being declared on November the 2nd.
So we haven't got long left, but
No.
I will touch on this one because the vote, the members get to choose, but the members get to choose from two candidates they don't want.
Yes.
So James Cleverly was by far and away the most popular choice with the Tory membership. And if you remember when it got down to 3, Mr. Cleverly was the front runner.
Yes.
And then when the final round was held, some of his folk had run away, and the members get to choose between Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch. So it's a difficult one. If ever I had thought about rejoining the Conservative Party, the gerrymandering of their leadership elections to give the members a choice between two folk they don't want, it's happened all over again. And, for me...
It worked out so well for them last time.
Well, and I think that the fact is that, Simon, is that it's, for me, it's just an indication of you haven't learned. And that's the bit that I think I find frustrating. Ultimately, I think Robert Jenrick will probably win. I think he's keeping the seat warm. But you can never rule out the Conservative membership going for the slightly more mad option.
Well, they did it before, and it wasn't slightly. So, yeah, I never, considering the number of Conservative Party leadership contests we've had over the last 5 years, I just find it a strange way of creating a contest between the people that you want in order to basically what you think is create or what appears to be the parliamentary party creating a situation where it's an obvious and logical choice so that the person that you want to win will win when presented to the members. And the members seem to have recently said, no, screw that. I'm not doing what I'm told. I'm going to vote for X. All of that could be avoided if you used single transferable vote instead.
Yeah, or like
it could just be done in one round. Done.
Well, or like the Labour Party. The Labour Party, I think, when they elect their leader, I think you get a choice of 5 on the ballot paper. So you don't have to pick between the worst option and the second worst option. We're not America, are we?
No, but STV would have the benefit of once you've discounted the outliers, then the person that ends up with the most amount of votes, it might not necessarily be the first choice for the most amount of people, but it'll at least be the second choice for the
Yeah.
so it would drive unity rather than anything else. Tim saying the Tory leadership process is beyond hopeless, and apart from the ludicrous timescale, there has never been a successful application of the scheme since it was introduced. So that's a round
Yep.
a howling endorsement for it. But I don't think anyone should bother putting any money on whoever wins this one being the leader at the next general election, because it's unlikely, isn't it? Let's be honest.
Indeed.
I'll race through the last couple because we wanted to round off. Johnson's book Unleashed goes on sale October 10th with excerpts released in the Daily Mail, including claims about things that happened during COVID, like considering invading Holland to steal vaccines, or a nice chat with Prince Harry to try to convince him not to leave the UK, and several details about things going on in Downing Street during COVID that he seemed to not remember when he was giving testimony to the COVID inquiry. Seems a bit odd, but the guy writes a book. October the 11th, Robert Jenrick says he regrets order as immigrant when he was immigration minister to paint over Disney murals in a child immigration centre, because he'd previously said it didn't want it to be too welcoming. But although he has stood by his claim that the UK armed forces are killing rather than capturing terrorists for fear of having to release them under human rights laws, I guess that kind of speaks to his thing about wanting to leave the ECHR. October 12th, PM tells BBC that basically in an interview marking the 100 days of the Labour government that he's faced choppy days in his first 3 months, and things essentially, and I paraphrase, that things were harder than he expected. That kind of seems like you spent all this time applying for the job, mate. Sadly, the former Scotland's first minister, Alex Salmond, passed away at the age of 69. And Portsmouth City Council announces it has found funds to support 2,000 pensioners in the city who would now otherwise not be receiving their winter fuel allowance. And that is our list.
Yeah, and I think if we just touch on that last point very briefly, again, there's part of me that's kind of, well, it's handy you found $500,000 down the back of the sofa, but I think if we end on a positive note, when we compare the state of the finances in Portsmouth to Southampton or Hampshire, we should probably be pretty pleased with where we are there. But 101 days of fun, Simon. We've probably got a couple of shows knocking about from those. But thank you for doing all of the research. I just, as always, do very little and sit here and just make noise. But hopefully you've enjoyed listening to the Pompey Politics podcast. I've been Ian Tiny Morris.
And I've been Simon Sainsbury. Join us next week for our coverage of the full council meeting of Portsmouth City Council. So see you next week. Don't forget to like, follow and comment on Facebook, or comment and subscribe on YouTube. Find us on all the social media platforms: Facebook, X, YouTube, Threads, LinkedIn.